Ladies and gentlemen, as you're still on your feet, we will then wait for the rendition of the national anthem. If you could remain standing, please. Thank you very much. You may be seated. His Excellency President Mbeki, the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Honorable Thabisa, the Principal and Vice Chancellor of UNISA, Professor Linkabula. We also have King Makosonke Mabena II of the Amandebele Nation, the Chairperson of the Public Service Commission, Professor Fikeni, the Chairperson of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, Dr. Fraser Moleketi, the Sangweni family in its entirety, and friends of the family, the Acting Principal of the National School of Government, Ms. Mkhwanazi, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, including the several hundreds who have attended online, greetings and good evening. Today is the 13th of September. The late Professor Sangweni would have celebrated his 92nd birthday on this very day. It is therefore fitting to reminisce about his life and his contributions towards the ideal of a free, democratic, non-racial and non-sexist South Africa. The theme for the inaugural Professor Sten Sangweni lecture is titled Professional and Ethical Public Sector, a Catalyst for a Developmental State. I couldn't imagine a more appropriate title because this resonates so well with the stalwart that he was, an ethical and professional public servant whose passion was to see our country developing to heights never imagined before, especially coming from the scourge of apartheid. Professor Sten Sangweni attached tremendous importance to a professional and ethical public service. His career and contributions, especially as chairperson of the Public Service Commission in South Africa, reflect a deep conviction that a democratic state could not succeed without a disciplined, accountable, and people-centered civil service. He was quite an affable, honest, courteous, and extremely intelligent man whose warmth permeated through his leadership style. I can attest to that because he was my chairperson when the Public Service Commission in the democratic dispensation commenced in 1999. So I'm not going to expose how young I am. I'll leave that to imagination. I'm not here to make a speech, but to chaperone the program so that you must have an opportunity to drink quite deep from the font of knowledge and wisdom from the speakers who are going to come to the podium and address you. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, the University of South Africa is the only institution of higher learning that carries the name of our country, and it represents the very spirit of Ubuntu that we all aspire to be able to attain. I'm not going to talk about its name and surname because there's a discourse around surnames that are being, yeah, you know what I'm referring to. But UNIS is proudly South African. Let us invite our host, the Principal and Vice Chancellor of UNISA, Professor Lenkabula, to formally welcome all of us here and of course give us the formal opening remarks. Over to you, Prof. Thank you very much. Give a round of applause.
Thank you, Program Director. Let me recognize the Program Directors, the Chancellor of the University of Nelson Mandela, Mayor Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, the former Minister, and yourself, the Resident Commissioner, Gauteng Public Service Commission, Ntate Vusimusi Mavuso. His Excellency, President Mbeki, the University of South Africa Chancellor, we're very honored to have you as our Chancellor. His Excellency, King Makosoke Mabena, King of Amandebele Kingdom, Honorable Mzamo Buthelezi, Minister of Public Service and Administration, Professor Somado Ramafikeni, Chairperson of Public Service Commission, Dr. Mavuso Msimang, and the Sangweni family, Ms. Pindile Mkwanazi, Acting Principal, His Excellency Mr. Saleh Omar Abdu, the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps of the Republic of South Africa, ambassadors and high commissioners representing various countries in South Africa, members of the Council of University of South Africa, represented by Mr. Mlauzi, members of the executive and extended management of the University of South Africa, and sister universities that are present this evening, all public services commissioners and various government departments, esteemed guests both present here and watching proceedings virtually, members of the university community, distinguished members of the audience, ladies and gentlemen. I also recognize that amongst us there is a Minister of COCTA. You're welcome, Ms. Klabisa. It's a privilege to welcome you to the University of South Africa on behalf of UNISA's epistemic communities who are committed and value this important imperative of being the platform for knowledge, for education, and for the pursuit of higher ideals, the ethical responsibility to ensuring that knowledge is at the center of the imagination of the future, even as we remember the past and the present and grapple with the present. We're quite appreciative that we are hosting and co-hosting this important event with the Public Service Commission and the National School of Government. Welcome back, especially to my predecessor, the former Chancellor of the University of South Africa, Professor Makanya, who now comes to this event as a commissioner at the PSC, as well as Professor Fikeni. We extend special word of welcome to the extended Sangweni family present amongst us. They've played a pivotal role in the preparations of the event today, not only bearing testament to the gift that they would have shared with their father, with their parent, with their husband, with an uncle for the service of this country. And as a university, we recognize that inaugural opportunities of celebrating the life and work of Professor Stan Sangweni becomes very important because of the enduring legacy that is required for us to learning from our forebears. We equally remember the words of a feminist scholar, Audre Lorde, who reminds us that we cannot thrive as society if we don't drink from our own wells and learn, analyze, understand the pitfalls, contradictions, but also the opportunities of being agents in the formulation of the solutions to the contradiction that bedevil our society. Professor Sangweni, as one of the chief leaders of our democratic dispensation, the building of institutions where public service, public affairs, and the roles of public servants as anchors of the democracy that was hard-won became an important arena. Here at UNISA, we're quite appreciative that the works of forebears and pioneers of our democracy, their roles in our society, their lives and works, as it is the case with His Excellency President Mandela, President Mbeki, President Ramaphosa, Metandi, and others, Thandi Modise, among the influential and notable leaders that would have studied here, that we still have the responsibility that we don't just celebrate the alumni of this university, but that we become a partner to the imagination of our public system as we would our civil society and private sector. Today we remember and honor the son of the soil, Professor Stan Sangweni, a man who dedicated his life to the struggle for liberation of our people from the bonds of apartheid and colonialism, who at the dawn of democracy continued to ensure that his legacy, his talents, his aspiration for building strong institutions of this country was affirmed and asserted through the diverse works he would have asserted in his life. I call him the son of the soil because indeed, in his life story, which is punctuated with the struggle for land rights by his grandfather, who was a member of the syndicate of 22 natives, which secured the land for the family and future generations at a time when black South Africans were systematically dispossessed of his land, became one of the anchor invitations for him not only to be an important agent for societal change, but to look into the real subjects of ownership, of being stewards of our land. As we know, land dispossession of the African majority was the cornerstone of colonialism and apartheid. The establishment of colonial economy was predicated upon dispossessing the majority of African populations of access to land, forcibly removing them from fertile land that they had previously farmed and worked productively. It forced them to urban centers where they became sources of cheap labor and abundant labor for the mines and other sectors of the economy. As an academic institution, and therefore, whilst we celebrate this legacy of the historical legacies of the forebears, we are quite appreciative that it's not only the forebears that Professor Sangweni would have drawn strength and inspiration to being a partner with the majority on the underside, but it is also through the works that he would have done with Me Sangweni to raising daughters that continued through education and knowledge to seeing themselves as important partners in the sharing of the legacy of their father, Professor Stan Sangweni. Having been born into this legacy of agitation for freedom, for democracy, for ensuring that the transformation and translation of institutions, public institutions, become ethical, professional, prioritize the imperative for transformation, and ensures that it holds accountable the public servants. It is therefore quite exciting, therefore, that a lecture that starts the inaugural memorialization of his life and work is about a professional and ethical public sector, a catalyst for a developmental state. Precisely because this theme resonates with his life, it resonates with his actions, his agitation for policies, as well as the driving of accountability in the Democratic Republic. Not only did he play a pivotal role in embedding constitutional values within the framework of public administration, his visionary leadership championed the establishment of professional, ethical, and developmental-oriented public service as an essential component of a capable state. Why is it, and why was it important for him to think about a capable state? Precisely because the apartheid regime did not humanize others. There were some who were not human, and therefore the work that he did was to ensure that the humanizing philosophy within the services of government was the foundation of a more transparent, accountable, and efficient government apparatus. His efforts to promote integrity in the governance were not limited to policy making, but included public and practical initiatives to enhance skills, improve service delivery, foster a sense of duty among the government employees. By supporting the professionalization of the public sector, of also a strengthened statecraft, including the ability for institutions to serving the democracy and to driving socio-economic progress. His legacy continues to shape public sector, especially those public servants who are honest, who want to work with integrity, who want to ensure that the country and its aspirations are supported by a vibrant democracy, whilst at the same time demonstrating to those who are not willing to embedding the ethics of transparency, of honesty, of truth, of prudency in the management of the resources of countries and institutions become alienated. I think the inaugural Professor Stan Sangweni annual memorial lecture has been created as a homage to his enduring legacy. It brings together senior leaders, policymakers, academics, representatives of civil society, and citizens to engage with deep reflection on the ethical foundations, but what we need to do today, not just in the past. The lecture acts as an annual high-level forum for dialogue, scholarly exchange, thought leadership, exploring both the normative and practical dimensions of statecraft, and fostering a new collective dedication to establishing a capable developmental state rooted in integrity, professionalism, and continuity to public good. It is therefore fitting when we celebrate pathfinders like Professor Stan Sangweni to ask the critical questions around ourselves. In the context of the increasing poverty, how do public servants, scholars, intellectuals rally around these important ethical contributions of accountability, but also ensuring that intellectual resources are at the center of reimagining and overhauling the state? The other question that I'd like to raise, which my colleagues in universities raise: how do we hope to learn from the wells that we don't drink from, or where the contextual existences and analysis of a capable state are borrowed from Western or Euro-American contexts? How do we even account for the fact that as we move towards the East, looking for global partners, that majority of the ideas and philosophies of Africa and ethics that could be at the center and championing progressive, accountable services that deliver and humanize our society and the citizens are pushed to the side? Sadly, precisely because at some point we've been fearful, not courageous, sometimes we've allowed leaders to deviate substantially from the responsibilities that are central to building strong democracy with economic transformation. It is therefore through discussions and lectures such as this that we are appreciative that we will learn and draw from our wells, and we will look and analyze together what is to be done. This question is often asked by our Chancellor. In this context, when there are challenges, what is to be done? What are the lessons that we can draw from his legacy, and how do we ensure that the generations to come will draw on these important ethical ideals in statecraft and democratic formation? I therefore welcome you to the University of the Land, the home of leaders, the university that has always been at the center of creating opportunities for engagements, for dialogue, for critique, but also for thinking together and with each other on how we co-construct the future together that is not only attendant to the elite, but that is understanding of those on the underside. We are hopeful that this lecture will create such a platform and will allow us to think and imagine a capable public sector that is attentive to the plight of humanity as well as the services that are required. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Limkabu. Give you another round of applause. Thank you very much. You know, it's so fitting, so befitting today just to reminisce about Professor Sangweni. One of the things he would say, and he consistently argued, that ethical conduct was non-negotiable in the public administration. He believed that corruption, maladministration, and abuse of power undermined a very important principle. It undermined democracy and betrayed the constitutional promise of service delivery and deprived the downtrodden and the poorest of the poor the much needed and desperately required basic services. And therefore, under his leadership, especially when he was in the Public Service Commission, he championed the Constitution's founding values: accountability, responsiveness, and openness as guiding principles for professional conduct. This he considered to be the barest minimum. But I do believe that for him, professionalism meant competence, impartiality, and integrity in the discharge of public duties. He therefore stressed that without a capable, well-trained, and disciplined public service, South Africa's social economic transformation goals would stall. In fact, they would come to naught. It is more the reason that the Department of Public Service and Administration, the National School of Government, and the Public Service Commission are spearheading the national framework towards the professionalization of the public sector, but insisting that meritocracy would be the hallmark of being considered to be a civil servant and not an evil servant. Ladies and gentlemen, we now welcome the chairperson of the Public Service Commission, Professor Somadoda Fikeni, to give us the purpose and context of this inaugural memorial lecture. Prof, over to you.
Thank you to our program directors, former Minister Fraser Moleketi and Vusumzi Mavuso, both of whom worked directly with Professor Sangweni. He was part of the very first inaugural commission, and she was the minister. So is the reason, among other things, for the choice. Your Excellency, the former President of the Republic and Chancellor of UNISA, and Your Majesty, the King Mabena, who is also the chair of the Forum of Kings. Honorable Minister Tlhabisa, and our partners in this journey, the Vice Chancellor of UNISA, as well as the acting principal of the National School of Government, the Sangweni family in all its extended forms, distinguished audience. I ride also on a very extensive list of dignitaries that the Vice Chancellor of UNISA invoked as she was welcoming us. Mine is a very simple task to say, today we've come to launch the very first Professor Sten Sangweni Memorial Lecture, because he was one of our finest public servants who epitomized the very ethics, the very professionalism that we talk about today. Not once did you hear him being in the papers for wrong reasons. He lived that experience, and he was also at the very beginning of the crafting of our public administration. So we've come together as the Public Service Commission, the one he chaired from the very beginning, and also University of South Africa, as well as the National School of Government, working with the family in partnership. We felt that at this time we needed to invoke and immortalize this trailblazer, precisely because of what he symbolized, not only in South Africa, but working for the United Nations, working for different agencies outside and inside the country. He was still the same person. The second point we want to raise: public service is the largest service provider in most countries, and it is the biggest employer. It is only through public service that people feel the success or failure of any state or democracy. And the mistake we often make, we look at economy, we look at youth unemployment, we look at corruption, we look at GBV, and not take a holistic view of saying, if you do not have an ethical, capable developmental state, if you do not have a professional and ethical public service, you can have the best policies, but they won't succeed. On daily basis, when you open a tap and water comes or doesn't come, there's a public servant there. On daily basis, when the police is doing his or her work or is not, is the public service there. When you enter into the customs or you are making submission to SARS, as the SARS commissioner is here, it is the public service. So very often public service is the enabler of everything that we want to be. Whether, Dr. Brigalia Bam, we're talking national dialogue or other things, the issue of the capacity of the state ought to be number one, enabler-focused issue. So this memorial lecture, which will be there annually, is meant to remind us of that and create synergy between an in-service training entity such as the NSG, the oversight constitutional body such as the Public Service Commission, and the research and training institutions such as UNISA. I just want to say quickly, yesterday is the day that Steve Biko was killed. Many more before had died, and many others like Mahlangu, Joe Gabi, September, Ruth First, and many others were to follow. They only were fighting to make sure that we have a better life. The scourge of apartheid ended, and the pioneers such as Stan Sangweni started the process, working with a cohort of leaders. A glimmer of hope could be seen. But somewhere along the way, we took a detour. We were a model in the world for the best democracy, homegrown solution made, institutions made. But we became another example in the universities on how you squander success and rush towards failure. Now, this lecture is meant to help us write the third chapter, how to succeed, how to fail, and more importantly, how to retrieve yourself from that detour back to the highway we started with. I then want to end by saying, we hope this lecture will not just about talking, but will be about a meaningful dialogue between ideas and practice. Because we often ask this question in the Public Service Commission, why are annual reports looking so glossy when people on the ground, their lived experience is the one of misery? What is missing between the two? Why at times people will celebrate some of the incremental results, but they are not carrying out the mandate? And why sometimes people will do wrong in so many institutions, different departments, they move from one province to the other and still get promoted? Are we a country where you fail upwards? I want to close with two quotes. The one by Amika Cabral says, always bear in mind that people are not fighting for ideas, for things in anyone's head. They are fighting to win material benefits, to live better and in peace, to see their lives go forward, to guarantee the future of their children. In the last few months, few years, Professor Sangweni, for some reason, we started having discussions, but there's one that stays in my mind. He quoted as his sight was beginning to fail. He would talk about how it is now difficult for him to see. He was losing sight. He quoted Helen Keller, who said, the only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. I think this lecture is meant to restore vision to us. We do have the eyesight, but do we have the foresight? Do we have the insight? And more importantly, do we have the heart to do the right thing? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sangweni. Another round of applause. Thank you very much. I'm told that in one province, I won't mention the province, one mayor wanted a celebration for his municipality for having received a qualified audit. And this was in the newspapers. It created a lot of brouhaha. No, I'm not talking about that. But what I wanted to say, by the way, my tender for being one of the program directors is about to end. So let me just conclude by saying, you know, Professor Sangweni believed public servants were custodians of the people's trust. He placed emphasis on the oath of office and the duty of public officials to put citizens' needs above personal gain. He was vocal about rooting out practices of patronage, nepotism, and corruption, which he saw as existential threat to governance. In the aftermath of the Zondo Commission, I could just imagine him saying this, especially after going through quite excruciatingly volumes and volumes of those reports and having listened attentively over the radio and television, hearing all these witnesses coming forward. He could have said, the Zondo Commission has shown us the cost of abandoning ethics. It is not enough to write reports or expose wrongdoing. What matters is whether we build a culture where corruption finds no sanctuary. A public servant must remember always, we are custodians of the people's trust, not the beneficiaries of their resources. If we fail in ethics, we fail the nation itself. With those remarks, permit me to invite my co-program director and former Minister of Public Service and Administration. She said I must not say doctor, Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, to navigate the program. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's quite fortuitous that we share this podium this evening, having shared a podium at the time when Prof. Sangweni was in the chair of the Public Service Commission. Good evening, Mr. President. Welcome this evening. I'd like to welcome the King, and I stand on the protocol that has been introduced by everyone else. I know that it's considered intellectual and other laziness, but just in the interest of time, I will do so. But I do want to use this moment just to acknowledge friends and family of the Sangweni era in different parts, whether it was Zambia or elsewhere. And here I'd like to recognize Ambassador Barbara Masekela. I'd like to recognize Mam Yolisa Modise. I'd like to also recognize someone who we refer to as the Chair Emeritus of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, Brigadier Bam, but in this instance, as part of that era. So not just as Chair Emeritus, as stated. I also want to recognize Zola and Pulani Ngakane. I believe, yes, I can see where you are. I think it's appropriate to acknowledge you. And then there are a number of others, and then there's the bunch of the kids of, and I'm not going to recognize them by name. One or two spoke with me, and I said I should have known the gang would pitch up here as well. So also acknowledging the gang of that time. And obviously family members, close family members, friends, from way back when. And I'd also acknowledge Advocate Mujanku Gumbi. And it doesn't mean I'm not recognizing public servants of today and yesteryear. There are a number of commissioners here. There's also the man with the yellow suit, as many may associate him with, and various others. And it's quite important to just note this, and it's especially because I at this point would like to welcome Dr. Mavuso Msimang, who's the Sangweni family representative. And he's a nephew of Prof. Stan Sangweni. And I think that if we think back, you see a rich tapestry playing itself out. And for those of you who don't know Mavuso Msimang, there's one or two things that I want to just raise. Firstly, there was a very deep familial respect. And I would say, I'm not going to just talk about the past, but probably a shared disappointment and vigilance, or probably a united front of elderly leaders or stalwarts using their moral authority to warn against corruption and defend the integrity of the public service that they helped to create. I was reminded of a story going back to Lusaka, and Aunt Angela, you were very much present in that story, where in the house, your home, you had President Thabo Mbeki. Well, he wasn't president at that point in time. You had President O.R. Tambo and Mavuso Msimang sitting around the table and debating some of the speeches that were prepared. We also know of the role that you've played, and we couldn't imagine us talking about Prof. Stan Sangweni without mentioning you. And I just want us to recognize that. And I also, Lindy, would like to acknowledge you. I'm not sure if Duma is somewhere in the background. I think it's necessary to recognize both of you, because I know that Comrade Mavuso and others sort of sometimes had you guys kicked out of your room in order that they were able to occupy the space, not least when OR was there in the house. So a special thank you to the family as a whole. So lest I start sounding as though I'm giving a small address, I'd like at this point in time to invite Dr. Mavuso Msimang to speak on behalf of the family. Thank you. Those years ago, he didn't have extra appendages to help him move across. And he could tell various stories of the skills he had gained at that point in time. Skills that I think he still uses in different ways, yeah? So over to you at this point. Thank you.
I don't know whether you start with the program director or just tell everybody here that Comrade Geraldine invited me to come to CETA when I was doing a really great job at Home Affairs. And no, I'm sorry, at Sun Parks. So I sit outside and she doesn't appear outside her office. And eventually I asked the secretary, are you sure she wanted to see me? I said, yes, it was, yeah. I think the nepotism started those days. Program Director, President Thabo Mbeki, and please accept my use of the protocol observed because I might really mess things up here. But Chancellor of the University of UNISA and former President of the, you're the Professor Puleng, the Vice Chancellor of the University of South Africa, Professor Somadoda Figeni, who is the Chairperson of the Public Service Commission of South Africa, Honorable Velenko Sini, Thabisa, Minister of COGTA, honored guests, and really all the people I respect in the house here. Me too, I think I should be allowed to say, Auntie, hey, good to see you. This is Mrs. Sangweni, the person who kept that house going when Malume Sten Sangweni was wandering with the ENCA and all sorts of other things. I would also like to recognize the presence of Tutu Laki and Tutu Kumalo. That's Negopi. That's right. Uncle Stan grew up in their father's house in Newcastle in Suspense. Two doctors, family doctors. Dr. Mfundo, I should have started with Sis Koli. Dr. Koli Kuzwayo and Mfundo Kuzwayo, they are also here with us. I'm happy also to boast an assemblage of people with these high titles. So you refused. I was not sure because this Dr. Mavuso Msema was obtained here, and I don't know at what point you are allowed to use this when you didn't sit for 7 years. Anyway, Professor Stan Sangweni's extended family directed me to convey its heartfelt gratitude to the leadership of the Public Service Commission of South Africa for its decision to honor Professor Sangweni's legacy by instituting the annual Professor Stan Sangweni Memorial Lectures, with today's being the inaugural one. Public service defined Prof. Sangweni's calling throughout his lengthy, multifaceted professional career. This calling seemed to course through his veins, deeply embedded in his DNA. It was his strong belief that the delivery of a proficient and effective public service that is responsive to the needs of citizens required merit-based appointments, a clear definition of roles and responsibilities, training and development, adequate resourcing, accountability and transparency, citizen engagement, and last, and unfortunately most importantly, it had to be insulated from political interference. I've lifted this out of something that he wrote. So this really was his credo. In an impassioned plea in April 2018 at the memorial service of Dr. Zola Skweyiya, Minister of Public Service and Administration then, Professor Stan Sangweni challenged State President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa to give urgent attention to the restructuring of a civil service in crisis, 2018, one which saw senior civil servants randomly suspended, often on full pay, for months on end, and if you can believe this, for years sometimes, by clueless ministers. Well, what has come of that plea? In the language of the young people today, it's dololo. The integrity and rectitude that Professor Sangweni expected to characterize the behavior of civil servants was analogous to the high standards he expected from members of his extended family, which revered and held him up as their adored patriarch. I'm here really talking about a large group of people who represent a multiplicity of families, some of them living intergenerationally, living together. Program Director, I am working off a very limited time frame on an occasion I believe should be dedicated to the lecture. But it must needs be said that Professor Sangweni, whom the Public Service Commission has so deservedly honored, was also a committed patriot, working together with other patriotic intellectuals, Rinki Njobe, Cindy Somfenyana, Tim Maseko, and others. He contributed enormously to the development of the curriculum of the Solomon Mahlangu Freedom College, which was based in Mazimbu, Tanzania. Popularly known by its abbreviated name, so MAFCO owes its existence to the generosity of the government of Tanzania for the education of youngsters who fled South Africa in the face of apartheid police brutality during June 16, 1976, during that uprising. The number of students who were massacred is debated, but it was officially put at around 176. But estimates suggest over 500 deaths took place. Whenever requested, which was quite often, Professor Sangweni shared his modest abode in Lusaka, got a tip already, and shared this with itinerant ANC officials, among them Oliver Tambo himself. Again, upon request, which he also carried out sensitive assignments for the liberation movement. So it's not always the people who are wearing uniforms or toying who have been deeply involved in risky assignments. I think one of them, and I'm not going to repeat it, almost cost him his job at the United Nations. And it was all because he was carrying out, it was on a mission to INC mission. In 2018, I must also say, back in the country by now, the good professor joined other ANC veterans, the Veterans 101, to make a fervent petitionary plea to the ANC leadership, asking it to convene a special consultative conference to discuss the already deteriorating governance situation in the country. Again, dololo. the powers that be simply spurned the call. In conclusion, I would like to restate how deeply touched we of the Sangweni family are, by the immortalization of Professor Sangweni's legacy in the manner the Public Service Commission has done. We look forward to the impact these lectures will have in continuing his work and ideas. I've finished.
Let me just debunk one myth that was shared this evening. I have no relationship familiarly to Mavuso Msimang. He was not sitting outside my office because there was an appointment that was not meritorious, but it was because there was a need to ensure that somebody heads up SITA at that point in time. And there was a need for somebody who knew how to deal with challenges in the public service. So in case you did not know that before, let me just put that for the record. I can also, if allowed to go back to the archives, bring out the documentation that supported the appointment. And I do want to say that at that point in time, we were very clear about the professionalization of the public service. There were no dololos. I mean, we're hearing new terminology here tonight and promoting upwards and so on. I think it's going to be interesting to follow the lectures going forward. I now would like to invite Minister Hlabisa, who is the Minister of the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. I do want to say, Minister, it's actually quite interesting that you are here this evening simply because there was quite a battle in the Public Service Commission at the time, looking at the Constitution, and it was Section 197, if I'm not mistaken, that talks about a single public service and talks about national and provincial coverage and not local government. And there was a huge debate had at that point in time when Prof. Sangweni and others said, well, since it's a single public service, it should also cover local government. So we're quite honored to have you here this evening. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Greetings, Your Excellency, the former President of the Republic of South Africa, Your Majesty, King Makosonke Mabena of Amandebele, the Vice Chancellor of the University of South Africa, Professor Somadoda Figeni, the Sangweni family, and Dr. Mavuso Msimang, our veterans and senior citizens gracing us with their wealth of knowledge and experience who have been identified and acknowledged, the members of the Diplomatic Corps, the National School of Government, distinguished academics, senior government managers, business leaders, and fellow South Africans. I just want to start firstly by remarking about the mayor who posted and celebrated the qualified audit outcomes. Indeed, it was in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. And when I saw the posting, because I had the number of the mayor, I quickly called him. And I said, please remove what you have posted. And then he said, it is a celebration. I have been with a disclaimer for 5 years. I said, no matter what you say, but it is below what you can celebrate. The inaugural Professor Sangweni Annual Memorial Lecture takes place in September, where as a country, we mark the Public Service Month under the theme, Professionalizing the Public Service to Build Trust and Restore Confidence in Government. South Africa is once again reminded that the true test of democracy lies in everyday experiences of citizens. When taps run dry, when refuse piles up, when electricity is unreliable, it is the citizens who bear the brunt. Most of the challenges our country experiences are a sobering reminder of what happens when professionalism and accountability are eroded. It is a profound honor to address you this evening at the inaugural Professor Sangweni Annual Memorial Lecture. Allow me to begin by extending appreciation to UNISA, the Public Service Commission, and the National School of Government for convening this important gathering. By bringing us together from across government, academia, business, and civil society, you remind us that building South Africa into a capable, ethical, and developmental state is not the task of the government alone, but a collective national responsibility. We gather in tribute to Professor Sangweni, the first chairperson of the Public Service Commission in the democratic South Africa. He was a visionary who understood that integrity of our institutions will determine the strength of our democracy. For him, public service was not merely administration. It was a moral covenant between the state and the people. His legacy challenges us to uphold the values of ethics, accountability, and professionalism as cornerstones of governance in South Africa. The theme of this lecture, a professional and ethical public sector, a catalyst for a developmental state. What makes a developmental state possible? It is a state with strong institutions built on merit and professionalism. It is a state led by ethical leaders who place the nation above personal or political party interest. It is a state with a clear and long-term vision to tackle poverty, inequality, and unemployment. It is a state that invests in its people through education, healthcare, and opportunities while ensuring that growth and development benefit all South Africans. Above all, it is a state that delivers consistently, restoring trust between citizens and government. And yet, we must confront the truth. South Africa is not where it should be. Too many municipalities are under intervention because of governance failures, fiscal mismanagement, and corruption. Too many communities are not yet enjoying full development. Infrastructure is poorly maintained, and too often appointments are based on political favor rather than skills and merit. In such conditions, the promise of a developmental state risks being reduced to words on paper rather than reality in the lives of South Africans. Various obstacles hold South Africa back. Corruption, patronage, and cadre deployment, poor service delivery, and weak accountability. Distinguished guests, in the light of these challenges, the Government of National Unity presents a historical opportunity to accelerate South Africa's journey towards a developmental state by bringing diverse political traditions together under a shared mandate. The GNU can strengthen institutions, promote ethical leadership, and foster inclusive decision-making. Its success will depend on prioritizing professionalism over politics, addressing corruption decisively, and ensuring that the focus remains on the tangible needs of our people, that is jobs, education, healthcare, and reliable services. In this way, the GNU can act as a catalyst, showing that collective responsibility, competent leadership, and ethical governance are central in building a developmental state. To realize this vision, South Africa must act decisively on the following areas. 1, professionalize the public service. Appointments must be skill-based and transparent, ensuring that the best South Africans serve the public irrespective of their political affiliation. Secondly, strengthen accountability. Corruption and maladministration must be met with swift, fair, and consistent consequences. Public office is a public trust. And thirdly, local government capacity. Municipalities must be equipped with technical skills and ethical leadership to deliver basic services efficiently. Councillors serving as mayors, speakers, and EXCO members must meet certain minimum competencies in order to be able to read and understand the annual financial statements, the audit outcome, the AG's report, and the recovery method, and also able to plan for the next 10 years of a municipality. If councillors that are deployed to lead our municipalities do not meet certain minimum basic competencies, we will not be able to turn things around. And fourthly, the government must invest on human development in education, healthcare, and social protection must remain at the center of our developmental agenda. And lastly, fifthly, rebuild public trust. Citizens must see tangible improvements in their daily lives through reliable service delivery and responsive government. Professor Sangweni often reminds us that ethics without competence is insufficient, and competence without ethics is dangerous. These two pillars must stand together if our public service and indeed our GNU is to succeed in building a developmental state. This lecture is not only a memorial, it is a national call to action. It reminds us that government exists to serve with humility, integrity, and accountability, guided always by the principle of Batupile, putting people first. This lecture challenges us as public servants to not only acknowledge the shortcomings, but also to recommit to action. This lecture is a call to renew our social compact with the people, to ensure that every public servant sees public service not as a job, but as a sacred duty to our communities. This lecture challenges us also to recommit ourselves to the values of integrity and professionalism. It calls us to build a capable, ethical, and developmental state, one that inspires trust, delivers with integrity, and makes democracy real in the daily lives of all the people of South Africa. That is how we will honor Professor Sangweni, and that is how the GNU must serve South Africa by building a developmental state the people of South Africa deserve. Let me assure you, not all is lost in our government. Dololo is going to be finally done. The GNU is stabilizing, and we are going to face the challenges confronting our country. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the intervention. I think it was very important. I want to just correct one thing that I've raised earlier. I spoke about Section 197 of the Constitution in terms of a single public service commission, but it's Section 1961. I've also got a constitution, the original one from that time. I also just want to make another reference, and this is one that tends to be forgotten. And I think much as elected officials take an oath on the Constitution, I'm not always convinced that they've really studied the Constitution. Because if you look at Chapter 10 of Public Administration, and in particular, Section 195, 1D, it clearly states Services must be provided impartially, fairly, equitably, and without bias. And there's various other parts, but this is what I presume this lecture is about. And this lecture is this inaugural lecture in honor of Prof. Stan Sangweni, one would argue is almost a lecture overdue. It's one that clearly recognizes him, and there's a lot one can say, but there's not time tonight. So as I introduce President Thabo Mbeki, President, I'm not going to go into your background and explain to people who you are, as they may expect, but I rather want to talk about the relationship between Stan Sangweni and President Thabo Mbeki. And I want to reflect on statecraft and say that this relationship on statecraft was defining and yet understated. It was a partnership in our new democracy, in the building of our democracy. And it was not a partnership built on public pronouncements, but rather a deep alignment. And one could almost argue ideological, because I believe in 1974, Mavuso, you made the required introductions, and I'm not going to go into that story. They must actually read the book to get to that. But in an alignment of the architecture of the state that was cemented through the respective roles. And we've heard a lot around this. So President Mbeki was the architect. He drew the grand plans for a modern, capable African developmental state that could take its place in the world. And Prof. Stan Sangweni was tasked as part of the team ensuring that the foundations, that is the public service, were strong enough. The materials, if I can use that analogy, civil servants, were of sufficient quality, and the construction, the standards, ethics and efficiency were high enough to realize the architect's vision. So I thought that I'd use that instead in this introduction, and I'd like to welcome you at this point to deliver this inaugural Stan Sangweni Memorial Lecture. Let's give President Mbeki a round of applause.
Thanks a lot, program directors, and Professor Somato Rafigeni, chairperson of the Public Service Commission, Your Majesty, Mankosonga Mabena, Minister Hlabisa, Pindile, Kwanazi, Mama Angela, and esteemed members of the Sangweni family, and Vice Chancellor and Principal of UNISA, Puleng Langabula, Professor. I think I need to stop there in terms of the acknowledgements, largely because there are so many distinguished people who are here today. If I mention one more, the others will complain, why didn't you talk about me? Particularly the eminent persons. I see people like Barbara Masigela, eminent person, Sisrope, Brigelia Bam, another eminent person. Even the ample eminent persons like Edward Gisvetare. so many, many eminent persons. I'm very, very glad indeed that all of us have come to pay tribute to Stan Sangweni. Really, I'm very, very pleased about that. When he passed away in 2021, my wife Zanelle and I were privileged to have the opportunity to communicate to his dear wife, Mama Angela, our sister and comrade, our sincere condolences at the loss of a true titan and co-architect of the democratic South Africa. In our message to her, we said that we were certain that not many South Africans ever got to know what a sparkling and priceless gem we all had in the humble and self-effacing human being that was Stan Sangweni. As a people, we have had to contend with a number of strategic challenges during the lifetime of the present generations. And to succeed with regard to all of these always required that we had the necessary core of cadres who possessed the necessary skills, who were selflessly committed to serve the people, certain of their liberation, who had the stamina to stay on what would necessarily be a demanding course, and who had the courage which rises with danger, which Nkosi Albert Lutuli had spoken about. And we said that, among other things, the then new challenge of governing liberated South Africa required of us as a governing party that we should take the necessary steps to build a new public service inspired by a new morality. And this was particularly important given the strategic role government had to play in the historic effort to eradicate the stubborn legacy of colonialism and apartheid. And we said our country was very privileged that it had Stan Sangweni, whose professional preparation and work experience made him stand out as the best person to lead that process of creating the new. And that was the reason that Professor Stan Sangweni served for a decade from 1999 to 2009 as the first chairperson of the Public Service Commission, established in terms of the prescripts of the 1996 Constitution. And to give a glimpse of what Stan Sangweni taught the public service during the process of his renewal, let us allow him to speak out once again. And sometime during 2001, he said, and I quote, "Unethical conduct in the workplace is largely shaped and conditioned by such unethical behavior in society. Corruption, weak leadership, nepotism, maladministration, and poor service delivery in the South African public sector are prevalent problems. So are incidents of violent crime, incest, gang activity, urban terrorism, farm murders, and taxi feuding in society at large." And he said these are some of the major impediments to our constitutional imperative for a development-oriented public administration. And he said what the public service needs, therefore, is to develop a vision which would make ethical work practices the cornerstone of how things should be done and strengthen the ethical culture of the public service, unquote. Our Constitution visualizes the Public Service Commission, which Professor Sangweni led for a decade, as a critical player in the construction of a democratic South Africa. And this feature stands out, for instance, where the Public Service Commission Act, which created the commission, as prescribed by the Constitution, says that the commission may inspect departments and other organizational components in the public service and has access to such official documents or may obtain such information from heads of those departments or organizational components or from other officers in the service of those departments, organizational components, as may be necessary for the performance of the functions of the Commission under the Constitution or the Public Service Act. Somebody, do you know that? I don't know if you are doing it. Accordingly, essentially all state institutions are subject to supervision by the Public Service Commission, consistent with its functions as prescribed by the Constitution and the Public Service Act. It is important to bear in mind that already by 2001, understanding the critical importance of its tasks, the Public Service Commission had issued a code of conduct for the public service and an accompanying explanatory manual and practical guide to ethical dilemmas in the workplace. An explanatory manual of the code of conduct starts with the top 10 values and principles of the public service in South Africa, as these are detailed in the Constitution. And the document says that the Constitution of South Africa requires that the public service should be governed by democratic values and principles of the Constitution, that it must maintain and promote a high standard of professional ethics, must promote efficient, economic, and effective use of resources, must be orientated towards development, deliver services impartially, fairly, equitably, and without bias, respond to people's needs and encourage public participation in policy matters, be accountable for its actions, be transparent by providing the public with timely, accessible, and accurate information. It must cultivate good human resource management and career development practices in order to maximize human potential, and has to be broadly representative of the South African people, with employment and personnel management practices based on ability, objectivity, fairness, and the need to redress the imbalances of the past. Professor Sangweni and his colleagues in the Public Service Commission put these constitutional prescripts in the explanatory manual of the Code of Conduct of the Civil Service because they were fully convinced that these were not mere rhetorical aspirations, but imperatives which had to inform the construction of the new post-South Africa, post-apartheid civil service. The late Zola Skweyiya served as Minister of Public Service and Administration from 1994 to 1999. During this period, Professor Sangweni was a commissioner in the Public Service Commission. Accordingly, they worked together as close comrades as they prepared for the rebirth of the Public Service Commission in 1999 under the new constitutional order. It was natural that Professor Sangweni would speak at the funeral service of Minister Zola Skweyiya in 2018, as Mabuso Msimang has just said. And understandably, he used this occasion to talk about the new civil service to which he and late Zola Skweyiya were committed. And once again, we should allow Professor Sangweni to speak out, and here in part is what he said. He said, "I'd like to propose that the best tribute we can pay to Comrade Zola is a commitment on our part that will pursue all of the wonderful things that he left with us, ensuring that they are done." Not dololo, but they are done. He said, "I looked at the ugly sins of our people in the Northwest, telling it in very painful terms that service delivery had not impacted on us. But even more painful," he said, "the visuals showed the faces of the people, including the faces of young boys with bullet wounds on their faces, bullets from the guns of the police. That is not a sight Comrade Zola would have liked to see. That is not a sight he would have liked to see after he had given us the flagship of service delivery, Batupile. It has not yet taken place in our ground," he said, "but it is a legacy that is going to live with us for years and years." Addressing President Ramaphosa, he said, "Mr. President, you raised the question very pointedly. Why is it that our civil service is not embracing the Batupile policy? And that should not be asked of our civil servants," he said. "It should be asked of your minister, Minister Thabisa. It should be asked of the executive. Because it is the ministers who should create the environment in which this policy can be implemented. It's not a slogan when you say Batupile. It is a statement, a philosophy, a statement of how public service should be. Service delivery must reach the people. Service delivery must build the people. It's not a question of giving things to them, to giving them tractors. No. We don't want to do that. We don't want to give people food parcels. No. He said, Comrades, well, I wanted our people to be nurtured so that they could raise the means whereby they could buy the food. And when you say, Mr. President, he said to President Ramaphosa, we will be visiting. This is what you say. We'll be visiting the department so that we can talk to the leadership. I asked myself, he said, what leadership will the president find? I know you are targeting the directors general. He said, Mr. President, I'm afraid to tell you, those directors general are not leaders. Not because they're a bunch of people who don't know what they are doing, because they do not have the environment. These are CEOs of a big environment establishment, the government. The DGs are as big as CEOs, but they have not been treated as CEOs. They are messengers. In your previous life as a trade unionist, Mr. President, you remember the terms busboy and spanner boy. That is what our civil servants are, what our DGs are. We should restore their dignity and the dignity of the institution that was designated in the Constitution. And he said, I must applaud you, Mr. President, for the wonderful step you have taken to look for ways and means of bringing investment into our country. But I want to say, Mr. President, the success of that project will not depend only on the ministers. But that mega project will ride on the back of your civil servants, as Minister Tlhabisa said, a civil service led by capable DGs, a civil service led by DGs who are respected, who are given contracts, not 5-year contracts. Give your DGs tenure, Mr. President, so that they have time to sit and actually dig themselves into the job and make forecasts of what is going to happen. That was at the funeral of Zola Square. Professor Sangweni had spoken earlier in October 2004 to encourage better understanding of the challenging role and place of the Director General. And during an address at a conference on strengthening oversight, ability, and effectiveness of the legislatures, he had said that the Weberian model of politicians decide, officials carry out, belies the complex environment and the many complexities that the Director General faces. While Directors General role have been variously described as the interface, the buffer, the technician, and the specialist, what is clear is that this position is inescapably caught between the partisan political world of the minister and the national, impartial, scientific world of the public service. This is exacerbated by a demanding environment with competing interests and overlapping of accountabilities. The pace of change in the public sector has been so vast and profound that very few people outside the public sector yet realize the depth of these changes. And he said there is a myriad of stakeholders to whom they must account to. They must look upwards to their political superiors, laterally to their administrative peers, and downwards to their departmental subordinates. And this does not even take into account the independent statutory bodies they have to account to, such as the Auditor General and the Public Service Commission. And he said, as new ministers and new directors general are appointed, there needs to be clear guidelines and orientation to assist each to understand their respective roles. I've quoted at some length what Professor Sangweni said at the late Zola Kweria's funeral service, because in a sense, it was his farewell message about what should be the standing of the civil service in our country. And indeed, everything I've said so far about the civil service is intimately connected to that outstanding patriot, Professor Sten Sangweni. Of course, there is a specific reason why the high-powered professional and dedicated agent of progressive change, Professor Sangweni, was chosen to lead the process of the rebuilding of the civil service under the new conditions prescribed by the 1996 Constitution. The reason for this was the expectation by the liberation movement of the eminent role which a democratic state would play in terms of the creation of the South Africa visualized in our country's constitution. In 1992, the 1992 document of the liberation movement as Ready to Govern said, in the context of the growth and development of strategy, the role of the state should be adjusted to the needs of the national economy in a flexible way. The primary question in this regard is not the legal form that state involvement in economic activity might take at any point, but whether such actions will strengthen the ability of the economy to respond to the massive inequalities in our country, relieve the material hardship of the majority of the people, and stimulate economic growth and competitiveness. In 1994, the basic guide to the Reconstruction and Development Program said, to rebuild our economy, we need the government to play a leading role in promoting reconstruction and development. And in 1996, 2 years later, the ANC issued a discussion document entitled The State and Social Transformation. And it said that the most important current defining feature of the South African democratic state is that it champions the aspirations of the majority who have been disadvantaged by the many decades of undemocratic rule. Its primary task is to work for the emancipation of the black majority, the working people, the urban poor, the rural poor, the women, the youth, and people with disabilities. It is the task of this democratic state to champion the cause of these people in such a way that the most basic aspirations of this majority assumes the status of hegemony, which informs and guides policy and practice of all the institutions of government and the state. And it said, however, there is a need to recognize that the South African democratic state also has a responsibility to attend to the concerns of the rest of the population, which is not necessarily part of the majority defined above. Adopted in September 2012, the National Development Plan, in its chapter on building a capable and developmental state, says that this vision requires a capable and developmental state, capable in that it has the capacity to formulate and implement policies that serve the national interests. Developmental in that those policies focus on overcoming the root causes of poverty and inequality and building the state's capacity to fulfill this role. It said a developmental state brings about rapid and sustainable transformation in a country's economic and or social conditions through active, intensive, and effective intervention in the structural causes of economic or social underdevelopment. And developmental states are active. They do not simply produce regulations and legislation. And the current government of national unity, the GNU, which Professor Slabisa spoke about, has set the building of a capable, ethical, and developmental state as one of his top 3 priorities. And in this regard, President Ramaphosa said in July 2024 last year that the 3rd strategic priority of the government of national unity is to build a capable, ethical, and developmental state. And he said we will proceed with the work already underway to professionalize the public service, ensuring that we attract into the state people with skills, capabilities, and integrity. We will continue to fight corruption and prevent undue political interference in the administration of the state, unquote. It was in this context that obviously there was and continues to be a particular focus on the civil service. For instance, the report on government delivered at the 49th ANC National Conference in December 1994 stated that with regard to the transformation of the public service, the then GNU had been attending in particular to instituting processes, including restructuring the Public Service Training Institute, aimed at enabling the training and retraining of public service workers so that it is effective in the implementation of the reconstruction and development program. That it had also been working on elaborating guidelines and programs for the transformation of the civil service as a whole, so that it is non-racial, non-sexist, efficient, and responsive to the public, as visualized in the Constitution. And indeed, for its part, the ready-to-govern document had said the public service must be based on the principles of representativity, competence, impartiality, and accountability. And for the first time, we envisage a public service that is drawn from and serves the interests of the public as a whole. The document on state and social transformation I've quoted said that the objectives of efficiency and high levels of productivity and the level of work discipline, managerial responsibility, accountability, and responsiveness to the public interest have to become the hallmark of the performance of the public service. Organized sections of the public service workforce who have been part of bringing into being the democratic state must, it said, provide leadership to the rest of the public service in upholding these norms. The NDP also pays close attention to the matter of the civil service and says that, among others, to address the twin challenges of poverty and inequality, the state needs to play a transformative and developmental role. This requires well-run and effectively coordinated state institutions with skilled public servants who are committed to the public good and capable of delivering consistently high-quality services while prioritizing the nation's development objectives. In the next statement issued when Professor Sangweni passed away, the Public Service Commission said he was, as Professor Sangweni was, instrumental in the fundamental redefinition and restructuring of the traditional role of the Public Service Commission. It said the birth of the new PSC in 1999 led to a new era in the public administration in South Africa. He contributed immensely to the body of work that the Public Service Commission had produced during the period of his chairpersonship. Professor Sangweni ensured that the PSC's work and influence extends beyond the borders of South Africa. And he said he certainly earned respect among his peers both on the African continent and in South Africa. He has shaped the PSC into a knowledge-based organization it is known for today, and said he has served the PSC, Public Service Commission in South Africa, with distinction. However, despite this correct assessment of Professor Sangweni's invaluable work, it is true that more recently important observations have been made about some deficiencies in the civil service sector, without which a project to establish a capable and developmental state will fail. In April last year, 2024, the New South Institute published a document entitled Towards a Merit-Based Senior Civil Service, Strategies for Reform in South Africa. And among other things, it said that the current civil service system in South Africa faces a multitude of challenges that hinder its effectiveness and efficiency, and significantly affect the overall quality of public service delivery. And it said one of the most pressing issues is the absence of a robust meritocratic framework. However, the process of appointing senior civil servants has become increasingly politicized. Appointments are often based on political loyalty rather than professional qualifications, undermining the autonomy and effectiveness of the civil service. It said the high turnover of senior officials, driven by changes in the political landscape, contributes to the instability within the civil service. and said addressing issues of corruption and maladministration is another significant challenge. The lack of strong and independent oversight mechanisms allows corrupt practices to persist, eroding public trust in the civil service. And he said, additionally, the absence of clear and structured career paths discourages civil skilled professionals from entering and staying within the civil service. And earlier this year, in 2025, the Public Service Sector Education and Training Authority published a report entitled The Public Service Skills and Competencies Needs in South Africa, Present and the Future. In the magazine, The Conversation they published an article based on that report. In it, Professor Mashupie Maserumule and others who had participated in the preparation of the Public Sector report said that a transformative and developmental role as visualized in the National Development Plan is about consistently delivering high-quality services for the good of society. And to meet these goals, the country requires people and government with the necessary technological skills. A lesson that has emerged is that technology skills are not simply a trend, but a means to manage public affairs more effectively. Examples of areas they are used in include big data, artificial intelligence, and robotics. And the study found that most South African government officials were not familiar with how the technologies of the Fourth Industrial Revolution could be used to improve the efficiency of the state. In addition, officials in government departments that interact directly with citizens lacked the technologies and tools essential to take advantage of the new breakthroughs in technology. And they said, we caution in this report that as much as technology skills have helped improve state efficiency, mainly in the global north, they can't make up for all of the administrative inadequacies, including thievery from the state, which besets the South African democracy. Equally important are human cognitive skills and ethical competencies. The report found that these two were a challenge in the public service. Civil servants didn't know how big data, artificial intelligence, robotics, or the automation of public administration could be used to improve public service. Being aware of these technologies and using them to the maximum advantage of public administration are two distinct things. And it said the report concludes that the government needs urgently to invest in revamping the way civil servants are trained. In particular, it must invest in continuous professional development, and while technological capabilities are key, the report recommends that basic human skills and competencies are equally essential. And to achieve this will require the development of a dynamic human resource system. The South Institute also addressed a long outstanding matter of the professionalization of the civil service and said the national framework towards professionalization of the public sector, developed by the South African National School of Government, sets out in October 2022, sets out a comprehensive plan to improve the overall quality of the public service, including senior civil service. This ambitious document aims to create a public sector characterized by skilled, ethical, and committed professionals who embody the values of the Constitution. It advocates a public sector with the right skills, professional ethics, and commitment to serving the public, which is crucial to building a competent civil service capable of effective public administration. And it said, however, while the framework sets out a visionary approach, it faces challenges in practical implementation. A key issue is the lack of specific enforcement mechanisms. The Public Service Commission itself also addresses concern in its April-June 2023 edition of the publication, The Pulse of the Public Service. And it says the success of the professionalization framework will depend on the manner in which a comprehensive action plan is implemented, is developed, the substantive content thereof, and whether the requisite commitment and cooperation is obtained from all key stakeholders. And earlier in the same year, or in 2022, Sarah Mene-Gibert of the Public Affairs Research Institute had expressed the same concern about that professionalization framework. It said that, but the crux, as always, is whether government will act on these noble intentions of building a meritocratic professional public sector that serves the government of the day in a loyal manner, but has sufficient institutional autonomy to build and retain skills to be and be protected from political patronage. And whether the government will do this, implement these objectives in a way that does not indeed insulate appointment, in a way that insulates appointment processes from patronage and instability. And others will say whether this concern has been addressed or not. Maybe we're back at Dololo, Emavos. The instances we have cited show that by and large, the civil service we have today is nowhere near the institution which Professor Sangweni and his colleagues sought to build. The Public Service Commission referred to this reality in its July-September 2019 edition of the Pulse. And it said, through the evaluation of the performance of departments against the constitutional values and principles, the Commission has found that most departments struggle to build a complement of leading experts in the functional areas who can plan and implement key policy and administrative changes that will drive development. Departments have the skills for routine operations, but there are major gaps in efficiency, effectiveness, and development outcomes. It said the skills must be accompanied by solution orientation that tallies with the needs of the citizens. From the analysis of the human resource plans in the public service, it is clear that the real problem lies with critical and specialist skills and the depth of those skills, and not so much as skills needed for the routine operation of these departments. It was the Public Service Commission. And perhaps to cap its honest and critical assessment, in the October-December 2020 edition of the Pulse, the Public Service Commission said in its keynote address, the Minister of Public Service and Administration, that was Senzo Mtunu, emphasized the lack of ethical leadership as one of the disheartening issues for concern. He further flagged the significance of the National Development Plan goal, which envisages a corruption-free South Africa, including a government that is accountable to its people, unquote. As we speak about Professor Stan Sangweni today, we should perhaps admit that he was ahead of his time and commit ourselves to help rescue the magnificent edifice he worked with passionate intensity to construct. In volume 25 of the Pulse, the periodical of the Public Service Commission, was published in April-June 2023, 2 years, that's volume 25, 2 years after Professor Sangweni sadly passed away. And among other things, this is the volume 25 of the Pulse, 2023. The Public Service Commission says, the public sector is a shadow of what it once was, with the country yet again finding itself on the precipice of deep societal divisions, great malfeasance, and without a moral compass to place it on a path in which the aspirations of the Constitution and the creation of a truly capable ethical and development state are realized. The reality is that the public service in South Africa is reflective of a lack of cohesiveness, inefficiency, and ineptitude, suggesting an incapability to implement a developmental state agenda. And it says that, in summation, South Africa's public sector does not exhibit the astuteness, the agility, the capacity, or single-mindedness that is driven by strong nationalism to do its best for the country. And although South Africa prides itself as a constitutional democracy, its public service is not a cohesive bureaucracy that is imbued with a common understanding of a developmental state, developmental orientation, and transformative constitutionalism, which places human rights and capability freedom at the center of the development agenda. And it said this is perhaps the central Achilles heel in the public service. When the Public Service Commission made these dismal but accurate observations, it was 12 years after the NDP had called for the building of a capable and developmental state, and a year before our country's government of national unity resolved that the building of such a state was one of its 3 top priorities. As I've said elsewhere, a month after these remarks by the Public Service Commission, in April 2023, Dr. John Andres, CEO of the South African Institute of Race Relations, addressed the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. in the United States about South Africa. And remarkably, his prediction about the South African state was the exact opposite of the capable and developmental state proposed by the NDP. Here is what he said. He said a state could be receding in terms of its capabilities even while its aspirations remain ambitious. This is the 3rd stage that South Africa is now transitioning into, although not many have yet realized it. We call this kind of a state the emasculated state. Its declining capabilities mean that it is unable to implement its plans. As the state becomes less and less capable, it is being increasingly bypassed by the private actors. This process has been underway for a considerable time already. Those who can afford it rely on private health care and schooling of a quality far higher than provided by the state. In the absence of reliable electricity from the state-owned utility, those who can afford it install solar power on their rooftops. In urban areas, residents' associations are fixing potholes, while in rural areas, farmers do the same. Civil society organizations like Solidarity are building technical schools and universities. Trash recyclers control traffic intersection when the lights are out. Large corporations provide security along freight rail corridors, while mining companies build clinics and provide housing and water near the mines. And he said, this is where South Africa's greatest opportunity for the future is to be found, in its innovative and resilient private sector and civil society, which are solving problems in the growing absence of the state and doing so successfully. And he says, in years to come, South Africa may well become a case study of how private initiative succeeds where the state fails. And in future, South Africa could end up with an enabling, compact, or a lean state, which cooperates with non-state actors instead of trying to stifle their efforts, with valuable lessons even for the developed world, unquote. It would seem to me that we must at least try to understand how this dichotomy came to be, such that a national consensus could emerge about the need for a capable developmental state with the necessary highly effective civil service, and end up, if Dr. Andres is right, with a lean service, with a lean state, with a small civil service tied down by routine administrative tasks. In this context, I'd like to quote prescient words spoken by then President Mandela in 1994. Here is part of what he said in a political report he delivered at the 49th ANC National Conference in December of that year. He said, while we have achieved support across the board for the RDP, we have to contend with the rearguard resistance from the parties of apartheid and white privilege, from influential elements within the civil service and security establishment. He said, in addition, the networks which ran low-intensity conflict continue today. These include agents infiltrated into the ANC and the rest of the democratic movement, universities, the media, and other institutions. Within government, the litany of corruption, self-enrichment, and the lopsided skills base within departments is only now coming to the open, exposing the decay of a national party edifice that presented itself as efficient, as well as the rampant pillaging of public funds in the last days of apartheid rule. President Mandela was more than correct when he said that the networks which ran low-intensity conflict continue to exist. Not only did they continue to exist now the counter-revolution, they also continue to act within the changed circumstances of the existence of a democratic South Africa, but without changing their strategic objective. Their strategic objective remained the defeat of the ANC and this program, which the ANC described as a national democratic revolution. To achieve these objectives, the counter-revolution has engaged in a multifaceted strategy, which included targeting the state machinery, including the state-owned enterprises, the state departments, including those of the criminal justice system, the economy, and international relations. A recent issue of the economic journal Daily Investor published an article on the South African economy with the subheading, South Africa's economy is imploding, with key industries falling one by one like a set of dominoes after 15 years of mismanagement and poor government policy. This reference to 15 years reflects exactly the latter period since 1994, when the counter-revolutionary interventions had the greatest impact. It applies not only to the economy, but to other aspects of the South African reality. I'm certain that in good time, detailed information will be available showing what the counter-revolution has done, following the example set by the Judicial Commission on SARS, chaired by Justice Robert Nugent. To give just an indication of how elements of the counter-revolution work, let me cite one interesting episode in one of the reports of the Justice Zondo's Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. This was when the commission interviewed the now late Jabu Mabuza concerning his period in the leadership of Eskom, as reported in the report, The Capture of Eskom. And the report says, the late Mr. Jabu Mabuza, who was chairman of the 2018 Eskom board, concluded his evidence with the observation that there had previously been within Eskom a culture of corrupt practices, mismanagement, and malfeasance that had been inculcated within Eskom by certain individuals over a period of time. This was clearly a pervasive culture and was sanctioned from within the board, the executive, and senior management, unquote. It was unfortunate that the commission did not deeply probe into this phenomenon of a culture of corrupt practice, mismanagement, and malfeasance, which had been inculcated within Eskom by certain individuals over a period of time. What Jabu Mabuza helped us greatly to understand was that the practices to which democratic South Africa would be exposed. Earlier I quoted what President Mandela said 30 years ago in 1994, that within government, the litany of corruption, self-enrichment, and the lopsided skills base within department is only now coming to the open, exposing the decay of a national party edifice that presented itself as efficient, as well as the rampant pillaging of public affairs, public funds in the last days of apartheid rule. What Jabu Mambuza told the Zondo Commission about entrenched corruption in ESCOM was sufficient warning that what Mandela reported in 1994 as a legacy of apartheid order would be replicated under the democratic order. And this is exactly what has happened. And on 5th September 2021, Afrobarometer published a report entitled South Africans See Corruption as Worsening During President Ramaphosa's Tenure. And the summary said, the new Afrobarometer survey findings from 2021 mirror the headlines. Not only do South Africans believe that corruption is getting worse, but they also see large portions of elected officials and civil servants are involved in corrupt practices. Society says that the government is handling the anti-corruption fight badly, while channels to report corruption are increasingly seen as unsafe. This correctly reflects the reality that indeed significant sections among the civil servants are indeed involved in corrupt practices. Then Minister of Public Service and Administration, Senzo Mtunu, emphasized the lack of ethical leadership as one of the disheartening issues of concern. I'm sad to say that if we conducted serious leadership audits today among the civil servants in all the three spheres of government, as we should, we would find extensive involvement in corrupt activities, both big and small. A discussion document issued by the Public Service Commission in 2014 on building a capable, career-oriented and professional civil service to underpin a capable and developmental state in South Africa said that even the best policies will fail in the absence of a capable state institution or state institutions. And to succeed, capable state institutions have to be led by a purposeful and nationalistic political and administrative leadership that is committed to pursuing a developmentalist agenda. In the absence of a purposeful political leadership, said the Public Service Commission, it is near impossible to build a capable administrative leadership and effective bureaucracy able to systematically develop and implement policy tools to realize the developmental objectives set by the political leaders. This therefore means, said the Public Service Commission, that in thinking of a developmental state, politics and political institutions matter. And correctly, in its chapter on building a capable developmental state, the NDP had said that to address the twin challenges of poverty and inequality, the state needs to play a transformative and developmental role. And given the hard reality in our country of levels of poverty and inequality, which speak to miserable lives for millions of our people, and conscious of the vital importance of the developmental state to help defeat these scourges, it is inevitable that, like Professor Sangweni, we must dream and work for the capable administrative leadership and effective bureaucracy able systematically to develop and implement policies, tools to realize the development objectives set by the political leaders, which the Public Service Commission spoke about. However, as I come towards the end of this lecture, I must state this frankly, that our reality is that sections of our public service have been corrupted and represent the exact opposite of what Professor Sangweni and his colleagues at the PSC worked hard and in a principled way to achieve. Speaking again frankly, I must say that it is difficult to believe that the political conditions exist for us to bring into existence a capable, ethical, and developmental state, which the NDP and the PSC and indeed the President of the Republic have spoken about. Much will have to be done to avoid the dismal reality of the emasculated state, which Dr. John Andrews spoke about. And indeed, this will be one of the major tasks of the forthcoming national dialogue, realistically to show the way forward towards the creation of that capable and ethical developmental state. To achieve this, we will have to draw on the inspiring example set by Professor Sangweni, as he worked hard and in a principled manner to build a public service that was truly fit for the purpose of the fundamental transformation of our country. It will also certainly be the case that we should also draw on the courage which Professor Stan Sangweni and his dear wife, Mama Angela, showed when they joined other veterans, as Mavuso Msimang has just said, joined other veterans of our struggle to sign the 2017 document for the sake of our future, which said, among others, we all have an obligation to ensure that our movement continues its commitment to serve the people of South Africa, consistent with the objectives of the ANC as represented by the leaders under whom whom many of us, veterans and stalwarts, served, such as Nkosi Albert Luthuli, Oliver Tambo, and Nelson Mandela. They said the leadership must ensure that all members of the ANC are part of the movement that is a servant of the people and not an instrument for self-enrichment and corrupt practices. And they signed a document which said, as veterans and stalwarts of the revolutionary movement, we're obliged to oppose the counter-revolution which is being promoted by some of the key leaders of our movement in the name of the ANC and our government. We restate our commitment to save the ANC from the clutches of those who are bent on destroying our movement and discrediting it in the face of the peoples of South Africa and the world. That was what Stan Sangweni and Angela Sangweni signed. They showed courage in doing that. And thank you very much for your attention.
I think we can give another round of applause. Thank you, Mr. President. I think, Mum Angela, we could not have wished for better this evening. I will now call on Ms. Pindile Mkwanazi, the acting principal of the National School of Government, to give us some closing remarks.
Program Director, former Minister Fraser Modikedi, His Excellency, former President Thabo Mbeki, Honorable Minister Hlabisa, who is also the co-leader of the GNU, His Majesty King Mabena, Professor Somadoda Fikeni, and all commissioners in the room, Professor Puleng Ligabula, Dr. Mavuso Msimang, and the Sangweni family, ambassadors, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends, all protocols observed. As we draw to the end of this very significant evening, allow me to express on behalf of the National School of Government and UNISA, as well as Public Service Commission, the co-partners in this lecture, our heartfelt gratitude for the privilege of participating in this momentous occasion, the inaugural Professor Stan Sangweni Annual Memorial Lecture. We gather not only in remembrance, but in renewal. This evening we have remembered the giant, a scholar, a practitioner, a visionary, professional Professor Sangweni, a man whose footsteps helped lay the very foundation of the democratic public service we are building upon today. He was not merely an architect of institutional reform, he was a craftsman of ethical leadership. Those who worked with him know that Professor Sangweni was a consistent voice for professionalism, ethical conduct, and constitutionalism in the public sector. He believed and often reminded us that no policy, no institution, no structure could function without people who are anchored in principle and purpose. As the National School of Government, we carry the belief forward through our learning programs. In fact, many may not know this, but Professor Sangweni was one of the first to deliver a masterclass for the NSG, embracing the role of the educator and the generosity and wit even in retirement. I remember him joking in his usual dry humor about the many name changes from SAMD to Palama and now to the NSG. And he quipped that he was just trying to keep up with all the acronyms that we had. Yet, despite the name change, the mission remained unchanged: to capacitate a public service that serves with excellence, integrity, and empathy. His commitment to capacity building, both in theory and in lived practice, resonate in our work daily. His belief that public servants are not just bureaucrats, but nation builders. His conviction is that ethical leadership is not optional, but fundamental. As Dr. Msimang said, public service ran through his blood. Minister Hlabisa said the GNU can strengthen institutions by prioritizing professionalism, ethical behavior, and accountability. He also mentioned that merit-based appointment in the public service is necessary for us to succeed. We are honored this evening by the President on contribution of His Excellency, former President Thabo Mbeki. His reflections are never merely a ceremonial. They are rich with context, depth, and often a necessary confrontation with our national realities. He challenged us to understand where we come from, not as a matter of nostalgia, but as a means of responsibility, charting our future and defining in real terms what it means to be a capable, ethical, and developmental state. We thank him not only for delivering tonight's inaugural memorial lecture, but for laying a firm intellectual and moral foundation upon which annual lecture can now grow into a space of honest reckoning and forward-looking transformation. As we heard so powerful tonight from the former President Thabo Mbeki and other speakers, Professor Sangweni's legacy is not confined to memory. It is living in our institutions, our public policies, and we hope in our conduct. Let this lecture not be the end of a conversation, but the beginning of a renewed movement. Let it ignite reflection, yes, but also action, and change the Dololo syndrome that we've learned about. Let the lecture inspire us to return to our institutions and communities with a more profound commitment to professionalism and professionalizing the public service, to mentor the next generation and to uphold the Constitution not only in rhetoric but in reality. Let us build a public service that does not fear accountability but embraces it, that does not shy away from complexity but leans into it with courage and competence and with character. To the Sangweni family, thank you for sharing Professor Sangweni with our nation. His light continues to guide us. To the Public Service Commission, UNISA, and all our partners, thank you for anchoring the annual lecture. May it grow into a premium platform for thought leadership, ethical renewal, and governance transformation. And to everyone present here this evening, we thank you. May you continue joining us in future as we chart the changes that we need in the public service. I thank you.
Thank you very much. We are reaching the end of a very, I think, good evening. And I'd like Professor Samadoda to come to the front. You've apparently got to give gifts to all the speakers, except for yourself, yeah? So we would like you to present a gift to the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Lenkabula, for your intervention. You can't protest. You'll have to come and receive this. You'll declare it as well. So it's... I'd then like to get Miss Pindile Mkwanazi to also come up and receive the gift, the acting principal. Dr. Mavuso Msimang, if you could also come up. Minister Hlabisa. And President Mbeki, Chancellor of UNISA. I think we should give a round of applause to everybody for this. Can I also say, Vice-Chancellor, maybe you should hand over a gift to the Chair of the Public Service Commission, Professor Samadoda Fikeni. So thank you very much. I would just want to state that we are full house in person here. There are a number of people who should be thanked in addition, but I'd like to thank the King, King Makosonke Mabena II of the Amandebele Nation, for your presence here this evening. You are important stakeholder, and especially so for the work that is planned going forward. I'd also want to acknowledge the family and thank the family for allowing the Public Service Commission and the school to honor Prof. Stan Sangweni. You've planned this event with the Public Service Commission. So, Lindiwe Sangweni Sido, we'd want to give a special thanks to you for assisting with the coordination of this lecture tonight. And I think we should give a round of applause. They want you to stand so that you can be seen. Yeah. Lindiwe, do you want to talk about the book?
Thank you very much, Program Director. I call her Sis Geraldine. My father used to tell us stories when we were growing up, and he liked to tell us about where he came from. He grew up as a rural boy in KwaZulu-Natal, in a place called Suspense Farm. I think they meant to say sixpence, but it ended up being suspense. So we've zhuzified it and we call it Suspense Farm. My great-grandfather, who was my father's grandfather, was a man called Ngoteni Khumalo. Ngoteni Khumalo in 1911 was part of a syndicate of 22 men. And they were convened by Mavuso Msimang's grandfather, R.H. Khumalo, Robert Hugh Khumalo. I think these men had some sort of foresight at what was coming, because the time was 1911, which meant they had some knowledge of the 1913 Land Act, which was imminent. The churches were using an opportunity to sell land to black people, and so Robert Hugh Khumalo was part of the Methodist Church, and so he was able to convene a group of Zulu men in northern KwaZulu-Natal in a place called Emanga, which is above Suspense Farm, where my father's people came from, his maternal house. And they formed a syndicate, and there were 22 men, and they bought land called Suspense Farm from a white farmer. And together they were able to syndicate this land and be able to have possession. That land still exists. Babulaki no Mamtutu are part of that heritage, Ngoteni Khumalo. And it was through the rich stories of my father that were encaptured in my heart and my soul. We started to put together some of the stories. But I couldn't resist not writing the book after he passed away. A very cathartic and comforting way of remembering him, but also ensuring that the stories that he had told us in our childhood would never be lost, and that children in South Africa would be able to see themselves in Stan Sangweni, that you can be a rural boy who was born in KwaZulu-Natal in an impoverished society, and even though my great-grandfather owned land, they were poor. It was tough. They struggled. His grandmother sent him to school by making handcrafted mats, namavovo, matansi, and he became an acclaimed scholar in his small village of Suspense Farm. So the book that I have written is called The Syndicate of 22 Natives, the Stan Sangweni story. You must read it. It's a good book. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we'd like to thank the National School of Government, the Public Service Commission, and UNISA for the collaborative work that was done to ensure that this lecture took place tonight. I believe that I have thanked everyone, and if there's anyone I have omitted, it's not been intentional, but this is what I have on this list. So I'd like to conclude by saying that one can almost imagine him right now in a fierce debate around the governed and the governing within the context of accountability and the strong opinions that he held on this. And here I'm talking about Prof. Sangweni. He knew that the absence of this and a public service detached from its citizens can only end in retarded progress. And I conclude with the words of President Mbeki from his inaugural lecture to us, when he said, speaking frankly again, I must say it's difficult to believe that the political conditions exist for us to bring into existence the capable, ethical, and developmental state which the NDP and the PSC, and indeed the President of the Republic, have spoken about. Much will have to be done to avoid the dismal reality of the emasculated state which Dr. John Endres spoke about, close quotes. So the challenge to you tonight, everyone in this room and online, is to ensure that we are able to move to what should be, what must be, and what can be, having outlined in detail what the reality is. Thank you very much, everyone. I suppose I'm supposed to explain the order of proceedings. I normally sit on the other side of the room and not on this side. So can I request that the President and the entourage that has come in with him leaves first, if we can all rise at this particular point in time. Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure.
Very proud to be.
Please wait until the entourage has left the room.